Before we begin, 3 messages. So, you've taken some of the advice that has come from untether.tv guests, built an app, and now you're turning your attention to generating some hard-earned revenue. Then you should be looking at Pontiflex app leads. Some of your peers who are using app leads are earning CPMs 100 times the industry average. And if you need any other reasons to start, I'll give you 2 more. You can run sign-up ads from top brands, the ones that you recognize, and it won't take your precious users out of your app. Go to appleads.com, that's appleads.com to sign up. When my company needed to develop a key mobile product, one that I was counting on as a new source of revenue, I knew exactly who to turn to. Macadamian. They delivered on time with incredible attention to detail, and I was able to get product into customers' hands faster than I ever thought possible. I've personally known them for 10 years, and they do make great products even better. Check them out at www.macadamian.com. Here's a riddle. How do you build native cross-platform mobile applications quickly without having to rewrite code and hire consultants at a huge cost? Titanium from Appcelerator. Called the easy button for mobile application development, it allows you to focus more on what's important, getting product out the door. Join the more than 1.5 million active developers who have created over 13,000 apps at www.appcelerator.com. Hello everybody, welcome to untether.tv. My name's Rob Woodbridge, your host. This is where we have those casual conversations for mobile rock stars. We dive deep down inside to try to figure out how they started their business, why they started the business in the mobile space, and how you can apply some of the examples or lessons that they've learned to make yours a little bit better. So listen up close, because I've got somebody that's actually tearing up New York City. Don't know what it is about this great city of New York that is inspiring so many mobile entrepreneurs, but as you've probably seen, there have been, I'd say of the 270 plus interviews, 100 of these companies are in New York City. It's incredible what's going on there, and this is just another perfect example. This is a company called SpotOn, and I'm speaking with the co-founder, Gauri Manglik, who is actually in New York, and big week, obviously, because over the last couple of weeks, Gauri has been part of TechCrunch Disrupt, a finalist at TechCrunch Disrupt, and also been named one of the 25 hot New York startups to watch in New York City. So I'm not even going to go into details here. I'm going to actually bring up Gauri and ask her to define what SpotOn is. Gauri, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about SpotOn.
Please.
SpotOn is the easiest way to go to new places with your friends. We pull in your social signals from Foursquare and Facebook and use that to learn about you to give you personalized and actionable recommendations. We're a mobile application, so if you have an iPhone app, you can download us right now.
So this is very different from what's going on out there right now. But so this literally trolls your social graph and makes recommendations on restaurants about where you around you based on Facebook or Foursquare, your friends in those social or location-based services, right? Is that?
Yeah. So when you sign up for SpotOn, you'll sign up with either your Foursquare account or your Facebook account. So we can learn about you from your, either of those profiles.
Yep.
And then also when you're on SpotOn, you'll rate places just like you rate movies on Netflix. And the more you rate, the better our recommendations will be. But then on top of that, we understand that you don't go to these places by yourself. You go to these places with your friends. So we make it really easy for you to find out if your friends have been to a restaurant, if your friends have rated it highly, if your friends have bookmarked it. We'll even tell you which of your friends you could go with, and you would have a good time together.
Oh, wow. That's great. So literally, this doesn't pull the information in from Foursquare or from Facebook. It pulls your social graph in from those two places, right? And then based on that, if they have signed in or they're using SpotOn and they've rated a restaurant, that's what you see when you log into SpotOn when it comes to recommendations. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's correct. But we do actually pull in, like if you sign up with Foursquare, we will pull in your Foursquare check-ins.
Okay.
To help us learn about you. And if you do check in with Foursquare, we'll make it really easy for you to rate those places because you've already been there.
Okay.
So you don't have to search for them again.
All right. So, I mean, it does pull in location. Does that do with Facebook places as well yet, or is that
Not at the moment, but that's coming very shortly.
Okay. So, I mean, it's great because you've got to start all of these things over, it seems, right? Which is one of these challenges is that, but this is one of those applications that you try to bring in as much as possible
Exactly.
into the app so that you've got a kind of a running head start when you launch it the first time or when you sign in through Foursquare or Facebook, which is pretty smart.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the reasons for building something like this. What obviously location-based services or offerings like Foursquare, Gowalla, Places, Yelp is another one, especially focused on the restaurant space, and so on and so on and so on. There's a lot of these companies out there. What did you see that was missing in what they were offering?
So we actually started about a year ago, and I was taking a class at NYU, an entrepreneurship class, and that was kind of my first exposure to startups. And so when we were getting around to figuring out what we wanted to build for that class, we were just looking at what was going on right now. And at that time, Foursquare was just starting to get really popular, and no one was yet trying to do anything interesting with their data.
Not even them.
Not even them.
No.
So at that point, it was a pretty novel idea. Right now, it does seem like there are other people trying to think about this space. But at that point, what was really interesting to us was taking location-based data and giving recommendations for you because people hadn't started to think about that yet. And some of our favorite services were things like Netflix and Pandora and things that learned about you over time. So we wanted to apply the same model to Places.
So, I've read I read an article about you guys that said that, kind of think Netflix, and in fact, it might have been you that was quoted in think Netflix recommendation engine wrapped up around food. Is that what you're trying to do here? Is kind of create that the ability to infer what you would like? Obviously, was that the premise of this?
So that's the core, yeah. So like when you start rating places and when you check in on Foursquare and when you do other things, we can guess how much you'll like a place. And so with each place, we'll give you a predicted rating of how much we think you'll like it before you even go.
Okay.
So yeah.
But that's unto itself is a pretty big task to do. So you've obviously spent a lot of time building out the technology. Is that where you started with this, where you kind of looked at it holistically and said, okay, so now how do we, because I like this restaurant with this type of food, how would you infer that I would like this restaurant? Did you build that engine?
Yeah, we built it ourselves. We're mostly using collaborative filtering, so we compare you to users who are similar to you, and then we'll see where those users go and give you recommendations based off them.
But these are people in your social graph, or is it just kind of like you're looking at it from a macro? Every one of the users that uses SpotOn.
Every one of the users who use SpotOn.
Okay.
That's how we give you your personalized recommendations. But where we have evolved is, so that's kind of our base now, is just like the personalized recommendations. But what we've learned is that we need to make it more social because you do go to these places with your friends. And so you are able to follow your friends, follow your social, the people who matter to you, and have those also be explicitly involved in the mix. And when we say, 5 of your friends have been here, we want you to make sure that you know who those people are. So we let you pick those people.
Okay. So you pick the people. And then, how did you test this? I'm very intrigued by this because ultimately you have to have somewhat of a large enough sample to be able to make sure that the data is actually accurate. Like, so when you're walking around New York City and you find a restaurant and did you guys have to do a lot of kind of food testing to make sure that it was in fact accurate, or is this really machine level machine level output?
Well, it's definitely very based on machine learning, but we did have a number of months to just test our recommendation engine because before Disrupt, before we publicly launched, we did have a first version that we've been testing with users for about, 4 or 5 months. So we did have a good sense of how good our recommendations were, and we were able to test it and improve over time. So, and actually before Disrupt, not on the recommendation side, but on the user experience side, we were able to take into account a lot of the things we learned, and we actually almost rebuilt our product from just the user experience standpoint to make it a lot easier to use.
So talk about that. So you built something, and then based on customer feedback, you and testing, you went back and rebuilt from the ground up?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't pivot or anything. Like, we are still trying to do the same thing. It was more of a product experience rebuild, like just like the layout of the application, exactly where to put certain things. We made it a lot more intuitive after listening to a lot of people. There were a lot of things that were kind of hidden in our application before, and we kind of moved them to the forefront because people told us they were really interesting. So we decided to put more emphasis on that, and vice versa.
Do you have an example of something like that was hidden that was that one of your users said, hey, why don't you bring that forward?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people said this. So before, when you went to a venue page, we would tell you there who's been there or if your friends are rated it highly. But people said that they wanted to see that right away. Like when they're looking around on their map, they wanted to see that information. They didn't want to have to go like one extra step and find it, at the window looking for more information. So we actually changed that. So now when you tap around on the map, when you tap on different pins, one reason to go there pops up from the bottom, and you'll see that 10 of your friends have been here, or 5 of your friends have rated it very highly. So you have that kind of more built into the initial experience.
And so when you do that, when you get that much feedback and you make that modification, does it change the way you look at the application going forward? I mean, because that really, as far as the way that you would weigh going to a location, obviously that was very important to these people to see who of their friends have been there. So does that change the way you think about how you make recommendations, or is it just, or how you present those recommendations going with other aspects of it?
Yeah, I mean, it did change because before we thought it was more very like scientific. We were trying to be very algorithmic focused. Yeah. But we realized that a lot of the decisions are made by you knowing if your friends have been there, or you knowing if your friends are rated highly. And we kind of discovered that when people say they want a new place, they don't necessarily want a completely random new place. They'd like a new place with some degree of familiarity. So if it's a brand new place, but your best friend has rated it highly, that's a new place you want to go try. Not a completely random new place, which is actually pretty interesting.
That is. I mean, the psychology of that is you could spend a lifetime trying to analyze that. Is that because I mean, humans hate change, anyways. I mean, they're reluctant to change, so they need a lot of coercion in order to be able to do this. So their favorite restaurant is their favorite restaurant, and to get them away from that it would be a challenge. Just as a total aside, do you see that at some point you bring in that celebrity layer? So it's like, especially in New York City, you say that, this celebrity ate here, so it kind of is an endorsement of that restaurant. Does that play into it, or is that a completely different layer from what you guys are getting into?
We have thought about that, and I think that is something that is interesting to us because especially food celebrities. So like if you are a foodie and your favorite chef has rated a place highly, that would mean a lot to you. Mm-hmm. That might mean more than a friend. And for some people, they might not care about that, so they don't have to follow those types of people. But we get that a lot from especially foodies. They want to see if their chefs are on it, or like restaurant owners or people who are blogging about food. They want to see those types of people, and those are actually more important to them than their friends. So everybody kind of has different priorities in terms of like what they use to drive them to go to new places, and we're trying to be flexible.
So, I mean, how do you decide the right features to put into a product like this? Because I've just taken us down a path that is probably one of 1,000 that you guys have looked at since the very first version, or since you started a year ago. How do you decide what goes into the product and what you leave on the side for another version, or for never at all?
That's a good question. I mean, that comes up with any product, is that there will be tons of users who might tell you to go in, completely different directions, and your users will contradict each other, will contradict themselves. A lot of times when users say they want something, if you ask a follow-up question, you'll realize they don't actually want that. It might just sound like a good idea on the surface, but that's not actually how users behave. So a lot of that comes with, us being able to see, first of all, we have to have a vision ourselves and try to believe that we have an innovative way of looking at things. If users challenge that, we need to pay attention to that and take that into account. But at the same time, every time a user suggests something, you can't just completely change directions. So it is. But there's no like one way to do it. You just kind of have to trust your gut. You have to trust that there are certain people you trust, people who have had experience of building certain types of products. different types of people will have different types of feedback, so you need to take that into account. So foodies will have different feedback from people who just like going out to any place and don't really care about the quality of the food and are more about the friends. So you have to take that into account.
I mean, it's so subjective, right? Anytime you review anything, I mean, we've seen it in the mobile space in how people review apps, right? It sometimes has nothing to do with the actual app itself. It has something to do with maybe the mood you were in, or the fact that your iPhone reset itself during the installation and it screwed up the installation. You know, there's outside factors that play into this. And in the software space, it used to be that, you know, if the old adage was that if one person asked for it, you put it in you'd ignore it until it came back 3 or 4 or 5 times, right? That same request. But in the mobile space, when you're getting hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads, do you weigh it differently? Like if you have 100,000 downloads and 5 people ask you for a feature, and the other, you know, the rest of them are fine with it, do you look at that feature and say maybe there's something here, or do you wait until 100 people have asked for that?
It really depends what the feature is. So I'll give you an example. So a feature that a lot of people have asked for is to be able to check in through SpotOn. Now that seems pretty obvious because we pull in your data from Foursquare and we let you rate it, so people will want to also check in there. But if you actually use the application, right now, there's no place in the experience where that really would make sense, because you might check it. Usually you check in when you go to a place. Yeah. You don't necessarily check in, and you can't necessarily rate the place until you've actually enjoyed the food and had a good time. Yeah. So that's an example of something that kind of seems very obvious, but it would actually be it would take into account a lot of like product design that we would need to kind of think about if we actually wanted to implement that. It's just not something we can just put in and it would work.
But it would seem like logical.
Yeah, it would seem logical. And even if 100 people told us to do it, we still couldn't just do it. We would have to really think about it.
You know, it's funny because, ultimately SpotOn is a conduit for all of this information. Pieces of it will exist in SpotOn, pieces of it will exist in Foursquare, Facebook, or Gowalla, or all the other location applications. But then you start to think about that hub and spoke model, where you're the hub to all these other services. Things like food spotting or Instagram, where you tie into their plugins. Do you kind of start to think about going that big, which is just being the food hub for all these other social networks?
That is one route. I wouldn't say necessarily that we're trying to try to take into account every single thing that we can. There are a lot of things that we could possibly take into account. There are some that are interesting to us. People have definitely asked for food spotting pictures. Yeah. That is something that we think is relatively interesting, because that is like pictures and influence people's decisions a lot. So that's something we might take into account. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different roads we could take and a lot of different services we could integrate. And generally speaking, we're going the model of integrating some services, probably not all of them.
So how do you decide? Like, the great thing about mobile and the tough thing about mobile is that everybody's API is open, and you can make your product as big or as small as you want. But most people go big. They throw in a bunch of features, like the check-in. Like it would have been some other company may have said, yeah, we'll just throw in the check-in, no problem. But what is that? What is that? What is it that stops you from doing that? Is it just you look at it from a product first point of view, or is it just it's not in your roadmap, doesn't feel right? How does it work for you guys?
I think it's all about product and how we see users behaving. There are a lot of apps out there. The App Store is littered with applications that are where-to-go apps for everything. So they'll tell you if you should, if you want gas station, if you want this, if you want that. But people just don't behave like that. An application for going out and going out with your friends is completely different than an application for looking to see if there's a gas station nearby. But you have to understand that. And when somebody says, I wish this just gave me recommendations for everything, like even stores, you have to realize that that's a different experience. A lot of it is just we're very involved with this space. We see all the trends in mobile, we see all the trends in recommendations and what people are using. So we have a pretty good understanding of, So like a lot of people use food spotting, a lot of people use Instagram. So maybe that is something that we could take into account. Maybe we would weight that more heavily than if someone's like, oh, there's this very small service that nobody really uses. At the same time, there might be smaller services that might help us like improve our recommendation engine, and just like we would pull in that data. So it is very, very subjective. It's something that we think about a lot.
Well, you know, I talk to the Sincerely guys who do Postagram, and you know, I asked them these questions exactly the same, and I said, why Instagram? The same thing that you guys like. Why Foursquare? Why Facebook? And his response was Matt's response was very clear. Is that well, we know they have a 3 million person following, and we wanted to tap into that market and understand, you know, leverage what they're doing and leverage the buzz that they're getting. So, I mean, do you look at network size, you look at buzz, you look at reach, you look at all that stuff, especially because it's somewhat local. Do you look at that? And that also plays a part in your decision, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have an advantage of being platform agnostic. So if something interesting does come up, we have the ability to, you know, let our users take get some value from that. So that does we do take that into account.
So how did you get here? So I mean, did you work in the restaurants? Are you a foodie? Like, what was it? Like, sure, there's a whole bunch of recommendation engines out there, and everybody's a recommendation engine now. Like, everybody, you know, is making some kind of. They want to now get you before you leave your house, instead of when you check in. They want to convince you or coerce you into going to one place as a recommendation engine. But how did you get into this spot with restaurants? What's your background? I mean, NYU in entrepreneurship. What was before that?
Yeah, I was a computer science major at NYU. Before I took this entrepreneurship class my last semester, I was all set to work in finance as a developer, and I had actually interned there and accepted a job offer for after graduation. And then I took this class, and I realized that there was something else I could do with a computer science degree besides just work in a big bank, which for some reason never occurred to me before. And so after I graduated, I tried to work on SpotOn on the side and work at this bank full time. And that only ended up lasting about 6 weeks before I had enough. And it wasn't that I didn't like working at the bank, it was just that I liked working on SpotOn more, and I was probably going to get fired anyways because I just couldn't focus on my work there because I wanted to do something else. That's how I got here. I mean, the idea originated because we were in that class. It's probably a very different ideation process than most other startups go through, because we were put with a team in the class, and we were told to come up with an idea. And so the way that we came up with it was we actually put down like every single idea we would possibly want to do. We put it down on a board. We did multiple rounds of elimination. So I ended up with like 30, 40 ideas, narrowed it down to this one idea, and then we decided to proceed with that. But the way that we picked the idea was based on how passionate our team was about pursuing it, how big of a market we thought it was, and all the kind of logical things that should go into thinking of, starting a business.
I love that. Logical, right? Like, so you took a logical approach to this, which was kind of a combination of brainstorming and then with a little sprinkle of passion and market size. But it's an engineering process that you took to build this idea.
That was probably true. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I love it. So when you looked at it and that last idea was on the board to do this or a version of this, did how much of your thinking went into revenue opportunities, and could this make money, or could we raise money, or was this just, we think this is a good idea, let's try it and see what happens?
To be honest, it was probably the latter. It was like, this is something that we would use ourselves. This is something we can see our friends using and that we think that could get big from a user perspective. We did, there are a number of ways we thought we could make money, and there are many ways that we can make money. So that was there, but I don't think that the primary the way that we started thinking about it was from a user and product perspective.
And how different is the product today from that original, from that, being in that class and having that idea on the board?
Well, you could say that the idea is relatively similar. Like, we're taking in data, we're giving you recommendations, but I don't think we fully understood how to execute it until a little bit later. I mean, our name even changed. We changed our logo. So like a lot of those other things have changed since then. Team has changed. We've gone through many, many changes, but generally speaking, the heart of the idea is the same.
Okay, and you're bootstrapped, so this is all coming out of basically out of pocket. Your time, your effort. How big is the team that's working on this?
Team is actually 4 full-time people.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of part-time people. We raised a small amount of money, and we're actually in the middle of closing a larger seed round. So hopefully we won't be
eating ramen noodles and
yeah.
Okay. Well, so I mean, it's fascinating because you've also elected, or maybe you're just out of pure geography to be New York focused for now. Is there a reason that you just roll this out in one city as opposed to being rolling it out across the states? What was the strategy there?
There's a couple of reasons. One is we wanted a test case to make sure that we understand how users are going to use our product. We understand that there's actually a fit in the way that we're building our product and the way that users are using it.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to use New York, which is a place that we we understand, to kind of be that test case. New York is also...
It's a small city, right? Yeah, just a few restaurants. I heard this saying that like if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, something like that.
Exactly. And New York is also very populated with restaurants, and it's the perfect place to launch something like SpotOn.
Yep.
There's a lot of data density, so from a recommendation standpoint, what gives the best recommendations is when there's a lot of overlapping data.
Gotcha.
So it's also very ideal for that.
So, I mean, very interesting point there, because you look around and you're not going to do it like in Wichita or Albany, because the amount of activity on Foursquare or Facebook is low relative to what you need in order to be able to make a true recommendation engine work. And then also, I think probably the density of users. Certainly Foursquare owning New York probably has the highest usage rate in New York City. So obviously that played, and the fact that you are in New York, that's probably a big factor as well.
Yeah. But what we have...
Go ahead.
What is interesting about SpotOn is that we're taking in data from a lot of services, but we make sure that it's really easy for users to give us our own data.
Mm-hmm.
So on SpotOn, we make it really easy for users to rate places, to save places. Eventually, we'll let users do a number of other things that will be our own data. And so no matter where we are, even if there's not a lot of Foursquare data available, we will have SpotOn data.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately... You can leverage only to a certain amount of time. You don't want to rely on all of those other services for your entire business. You want to build your own. One of the things that I noticed when I was using it, I'm not in New York. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. But in order for me to be able to see any locations, I had to have actually asked friends to join or to friend with me on SpotOn. Do you see a point in time where a guy like me who comes into New York quite regularly would be able to then just have a kind of a macro look at all the restaurants that were rated, and so if I'm in Soho or I'm staying in Soho, I can zoom in and see some of the restaurant recommendations, just at kind of a global scale from SpotOn? Or is it always going to be that tailored experience to my social graph?
Well, this might have been a separate issue, but you can actually, when somebody signs up and they have no friends on Foursquare, no friends on Facebook, you will see...
I have friends on both, so I just want to make that very clear. I'm not...
I'm sure you do.
A friend of one.
For people that don't.
Yes.
They will still see default recommendations. So the one-player user experience is very important, because even if you don't want to follow anybody, even if you just start going to places and rating them yourself, we'll still be able to give you recommendations. And it does not involve anything related to your friends.
Gotcha. Yeah, but you have to participate. You have to play. That's a great way of putting it. The one-player experience. I love that. So one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is awareness making for something like this or any of their apps. So you're focused on New York City, high concentration of not only location-based service usage as well as restaurants. But which limits your geography, which is great from a marketing standpoint. But how do you market this thing?
So there are a number of ways. So one is that we're definitely focused on location-based users right now. So Foursquare users will find the most value out of something like this because that is the deepest integration. And I also think it's the most logical sense. Like I give you my check-ins, you give me recommendations, like they understand it. The other kind of large service that we'll be using is Facebook, and that will be the time where we really focus on going more mainstream as opposed to just trying to focus on New York and like early adopters. And there's a number of ways that we're thinking of marketing. One of them is the product has to, in and of itself, just be a really great product, and it has to kind of sell itself. And we're working on a number of kind of more organic, viral features that will help us grow. I can give you one example is that when we give you a recommendation, we want you to be able to capture that moment where you decide to make the decision to go. And in that moment, you might want to invite your friends. You might want to tell even non-SpotOn users that you're going to this place and they are welcome to join you. That'll be one way that we want to grow kind of organically.
So very much a viral. Obviously, restaurants are social and viral in nature anyway. So you want to follow that path.
Right. Exactly. And the recommendation will kind of be the kind of base for this very short-term planning. Because there are some services that just focus on the plan, but they don't give you this deep set of like very interesting recommendations to kind of enable you to actually get to the planning phase. And so we'll focus on that. There are a number of partnerships that we're interested in making with restaurants and brands that we think would be interesting to help us get more awareness. And
you think that like some of the chains that would help market it, that kind of thing?
I'm sorry?
Like to get some of the bigger restaurant chains to help market it, or are you thinking just about around what we were talking about earlier, celebrity restaurants or popular restaurants to get them engaged with this? Offer deals or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit of both actually. But dealing with brands and that will be a little bit further down the timeline.
Okay. So you when did you launch? You launched at TechCrunch Disrupt.
Yeah. So
and
it was
talk about that
2
weeks ago. Talk about that experience, about being involved with something like that, because you talk about the hub of technology in the center of the known universe in New York City. This is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it was really exciting. We were really pumped to be selected to be part of the startup battlefield, and just being there was really it was really good for us. We'd been working really hard. It was kind of like a way for us to enjoy the hard work that we've been doing for the past couple months, and it was really great to meet all the other companies. There's a lot of very interesting things happening, especially in New York right now, and it was good to be a part of that. I think being on stage and being able to explain our product to thousands of people at one time was also really exciting, and kind of was very cathartic even to just be able to kind of finally launch and tell everybody what we're up to. So overall, it was like a wonderful experience. Just the energy of the place was very inspiring. It's not like we left tired, but we left very inspired.
Yeah, a good type of exhaustion.
Yeah.
So, was that, you certainly got a lot of play, a lot of activity from that. There was not only a lot of good, positive feedback from that, but a lot of connections must have been made. What was the general sense of the feedback that you got from some of the pundits in technology that were watching you, that were listening to you talk?
So I think that people generally gave very positive feedback. Mm-hmm. Very excited about what we could do with our recommendation technology and how we can apply it to places. I think that everybody will have the same comment when any startup starts, is that you need to get users, and especially with iPhone applications, there's a lot of iPhone apps out there, and kind of rising to the top will be a challenge. So we will definitely face that, but we have kind of our marketing strategy, and so we think we can do it. So.
I love hearing the stories about TechCrunch Disrupt, because in the sense that it gives you guys as a company an ultimate goal for actually finishing the development of the product. So there's a deadline on your development. Did you take that as you said, listen, we that was the driving force for actually getting the product out, or were you already aiming to launch around that period of time?
We were aiming to launch around that period of time anyways, actually, but having that deadline was great. Like, it was really, really helpful for us to kind of just make sure that we, that we finished up and like got to a finished product standpoint. There's a lot of you can always say that you're almost there, and say that it'll only take me a couple of days, but that couple of days, if you don't actually spend the time and do it, could take a lot more time, because you can be almost there for quite some time.
Exactly. Well, yeah. How important is that from a development standpoint? People talk about getting a product out that is okay, that is minimum viable product, which means, I think that term means mediocre product, but will improve as we go. But how important is it from a development standpoint to get that first product out as the best product? So take the extra time, get this thing out. Don't release a minimum viable product that you're not satisfied with. I mean, how important is it from an engineering user satisfaction standpoint? You've been building this for a year. With one version out, you re-engineered from the ground up to be able to accommodate some of the changes, and now there's a deadline. What do you start to do to hit that deadline? How important was that?
Well, I think getting your product out in front of users is the most important thing you can do, because you'll have no idea how people will use it, or if people want to use it until you do that. And we did that with our first version. And so that was really good that we could get that product out and get a ton of feedback before we started to kind of rebuild it. So we didn't have that much time to rebuild it, and there were a lot of features that didn't make it just based on our timeline. And so you just have to, be very aware of how things are moving and how fast people are working. And if there's something that is not worth the loss of sleep, in the end, you just have to take it out.
And not spend that extra day or two to add it just because, right? You have to be rigid with those with your product roadmap.
I mean, it's a lot of the time it's not about adding features. It's about, if you keep trying to add features, you don't know how people will use the features that you kind of had initially. So I think it's better, instead of adding new features, is to make sure that people are using the features you do have in the way that you expect them to. And a lot of that will be spending time in the details, making sure that the messaging is correct, when the onboarding process is good, and those details that you will miss out on if you just kind of tried to add more features.
So you've been doing this for a year, right? You learned, you said that you had been exposed to being an entrepreneur through this NYU class, which is kudos to them. It must have been like an absolutely incredible class to be able to say, hey, wait. I've spent my whole life this track, and then one class to make you decide to, listen, there is another opportunity here for me.
Yeah.
So, whatever class that is, you should be recommending to everybody that you know.
I am.
Good. What's been your experience as an entrepreneur in the mobile space so far? Does it live up to your expectations? Did you have any going in?
So it's kind of interesting. I think that it was one of those things where me and entrepreneurship were perfectly fit for each other, but we just didn't know it yet.
You hadn't met yet?
And so, yeah. So entrepreneurship is definitely very difficult. It's very emotionally and time and consuming in every way. So you can't necessarily say that, oh yeah, I love being an entrepreneur. It's so easy. You just build stuff and you make money. There's a lot of ups and downs. You have to learn a ton on the job. And if that's not the type of person you are, you might not enjoy it. But it turns out that's the type of person I am. So it was not about it's not like I've been disappointed or, my expectations have been surpassed. It's just been what, it's been a normal, it feels like this is what I should be doing.
That's pretty incredible, right? There's a comfort level with being an entrepreneur, right? And it kind of fits well with a theory that says that you're born an entrepreneur. like you have that in you or you don't. And if there's a natural seamless transition from, I mean, what you're about to do, which is the corporate of the corporate, and get behind in a cubicle and develop and program for a large organization in the financial world, it's a lot of people can't transition from that kind of world into being an entrepreneur with all the pressures and the pains and the concern and the demands on it. But if you can transition that easily, it must be that you were made or born to do this. Is that how you feel?
I mean, people will ask me all the time, like, if this doesn't work out, are you going to go back to your job? Like, you know, just getting a job. And that has, like, never crossed my mind. I've never been like, oh, this is so hard. I need to get a job at a big company.
This is your job.
Yeah. And I will continue to be an entrepreneur for the rest of my life.
Oh, no.
So it's not.
That's like, it's an affliction. It's a disease now that you've got it.
I mean, it's like a personality trait even. Like, if you can't work for other people, if you can't be that person, then you just can't. Like, some people are the opposite. They just, like, the thought of being an entrepreneur to some of my friends is just, like, ridiculous. Yeah. Like, there's no reason they could imagine themselves doing it. So,
well, you know, one litmus test is that if you've ever thought that you should be the leader of a small nation, yeah, actually, you've got entrepreneurial tendencies, right? There's a little bit of ego and a lot of determination, a lot of hard work. And I mean, it's really fascinating to think that, you know, if you hadn't taken that class, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to be on untether.tv this early, right?
That's true.
But if you hadn't have taken that class at NYU and had just been, you would never, maybe later it would have been latent, but you would have discovered it later in life. But think about that. It's like a chance of fate. And I love the fact that you did it. I do want to ask about growth here. So how do you think that you can expand out of New York City? Or is that the plan? Or do you stay local? I mean, what about San Fran or the rest of the U.S. or the rest of the world? How do you scale?
We will be doing that as soon as it's feasible. I mean, we'll be in all of New York City in 2 weeks, actually. So expanding beyond Manhattan to all of New York, or New York City. Going to the West Coast, San Francisco is probably going to be our next target, and that'll take a little bit more time, just to make sure that we have the right amount of data and that we can handle that type of, making sure that our recommendation experience is good enough. But I think that expanding geography-wise is a priority for us. As soon as we understand how to make it work in New York, we'll be expanding as quickly as possible into other cities and hopefully nationwide soon.
And then what's after that for you guys? So, you can continue to add services, but are you looking at then, if you project, I'm never going to project more than a year ahead because I don't think anybody can predict that far. But say 9 months from now, you're in New York, all of New York, so all the boroughs, and you're in San Francisco and maybe another city or a couple of other cities. Do you start looking at the aggregate data then and say, and start talking about, restaurant trends and food trends and that kind of stuff? Or do you stay in the app space? Do you stay kind of just in the recommendation engine space for apps?
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of ways that we can grow. One of them is not necessarily just staying in mobile. I think there's a lot of things you can do to augment the mobile experience and social experience on the web and other types of platforms. So that's something that we would think about. I think that the goal for most products is to kind of embed themselves in a user's daily life and to make it feel like they need it because it adds so much value. And that's not. You can do that in many different ways, but getting to that point is like our ultimate goal, right? So like just making sure that we make it really easy for people to go out and go to places with their friends and enjoy that experience.
I love it. I love the idea. I love everything about what you're doing. Where can people find out about this? I know it's only available in New York City, but you can download it from, I'm in Canada. I downloaded it from the Canadian App Store. You can download it from all the app stores. So just go and find SpotOn on the App Store. And is that the best recommendation?
Yeah, if you search SpotOn, one word, on the iPhone App Store, you should be able to find it. We are available in every country, though you can only get recommendations for Manhattan right now. Very soon it will be for New York City. But if you're if you're from a different country and you're visiting New York, you can use it. So that's why it's available in other app stores too.
And soon to be in many other cities. And ultimately, is it going to stay on just iOS, or are you going to move to Android or BlackBerry or other platforms?
No, we're definitely going to be moving to building an Android app as soon as we can. You never really realize how many people are on Android until you build an iPhone application and everybody you talk to says that they have an Android. So we will be doing Android as soon as we get iPhone right.
Okay. And that seems to be the typical response that I see, is I get one platform and then try to mimic that kind of, the user experience as much as you can in the other platforms. So
yeah.
Android soon. So go to, and now your, so URL is, where can they find you on the web?
We're at www.getspoton.com. Our Twitter handle is @getspoton.
I've been speaking with Gauri Manglik, who is the co-founder of SpotOn from New York City. Go and check it out. Thank you, Gauri, for being a part of this. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I'm glad I could be here.
And for those of you who are still watching and listening, really appreciate it. I know you found some value. If you have any feedback on this, reach out, untether@gmail.com. And I'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for watching.